Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. We hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday for those of you celebrating Thanksgiving. And happy to wrap up the year here in December with our last webinar of 2024, appropriately enough, with John Strickland and Fernando Espana, who have been hosting some wonderful content for us this year. So happy to close it out strong. As usual, we will be taking questions using the control panel. So if you'll enter your questions using the chat, we will take those at the very tail end. And I'll turn it over now to Fernando to introduce the presenters today. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you, Jenny. So as you know, that John and I are the joint chairs of the NextGen Joint Working Group for CAI, and we're absolutely happy to present another webinar in our series of what consists of NextGen and how do we really take advantage of it. So we have some exciting speakers today. One, a surprise one, and the other one is Russell Batchelor. And so Russell, I've known for a while. In fact, we walked to Sydney Harbor together at the IGLC International Group of Lean Instructors conference back in Sydney in 2005. So we all have a little history here. But Russell, why don't you give a few seconds of your background here?
Yeah, no, the real short version. I'm a civil engineer by training. Became a project manager in my late 20s. I joined BAA, which I'll talk about more later. Spent 21 years at BAA. The last 8 of which were at 7 or 8 of which were at Heathrow, where I was head of buildings for Terminal 5 for couple of years. Then I was head of Terminal 5 Phase 2, and I finished up as head of design and construction on Terminal 2, all of which were fantastic projects to work on and used a lot of the lean and next gen techniques that we're going to talk about a bit later.
Hey, real quick, Russell, you want to tell everybody what BAA is an acronym for?
It's in the presentation. We'll come to it, John, rather than get bogged down in the intros.
Okay, Ali, hey, surprise, glad you could make it here, and we're excited to hear from you as well. I want you to give a little bit of an intro for yourself.
Hi, my name is Ali Afghan. I am a mechanical engineer and I still have my professional engineering stamp. I worked in consulting firm for about 12 years. Then I joined Intel Corporation, worked there for 18 years. Now for the past 10 years, I've been working in pharmaceutical industry. And I've had project management, project engineering, program directors, organizational leadership, appointed, and those kind of things all my career. And right now I'm working on several global projects and mostly in design, construction, and engineering.
Yeah, and real quick, Ali was a program manager with me on a project similar to one Russell's going to talk about. So towards the end, we're going to have a little segue. Meanwhile, back in Oregon, talking about how some of these ideas were developing on 2 different continents at the same time. Is that enough introduction, Fernando? Should we go on? Would you like to talk some more?
Yeah, no, let's move on here to the next slide. So yeah, so the whole concept of why Back to the Future, and one thing we wanted to emphasize with this group, especially around NextGen, is the fact that some of these practices have already been applied successfully, and there's a couple of these iconic projects that both Russell and John Ali will speak to that have proven out, have come together in spectacular ways. Which why aren't we learning from those, and why aren't we doing more of them? So yes, there's some excellence going around the world, but these are very special cases to share. So some of the concepts that were applied, are very familiar, should be very familiar. Lean construction, integrated materials management, and collaborative processes. I got my granddaughter here sticking a necklace in front. So you never know, very unpredictable. Production science, weekly and daily work packages, constraint management, integrated high performance teams, and so much more. So really excited to share this with you, and kind of bring back some of these projects. And so we can help rethink how we approach our projects and what opportunities we really do have that may not be exactly what you're going to see, but things similar to them. So with that, I will, let's go to the next slide, John.
Yeah, so this is just a quick thing about what we do at this next gen, and this is most of you are familiar with us, but this is Fernando and I've been working with groups to take 4 different schools of thought that have been emerging. Sometimes we were there when they started emerging and recognized they kind of all started from the same place of lean construction, advanced work packaging, collaborative contracting, and project production management, and kind of blending those together and creating a next wave or new capability of project delivery. So this is, we've been having a lot of webinars talking about that. And this is kind of going back to the source though. Remember I said that all these ideas kind of started from the same place and started emerging, and we're bringing them back together. And so preview the key points is, hey, we've been doing this, most of these things have been were applied successfully 20 years ago, although not all of them at the same time on the same project. And so we could give upcoming applications a rolling start, and commercial arrangements always are part of it, but particularly when we talk about the Oregon experience, you'll understand that we learned that commercial arrangements could vary, but they must encourage rather than prevent supply chain engagement. So that's a quick preview. And we'll go into some of the key ideas. I'm not going to read all these things. You can look up there and see how many of those things sound familiar. But I think you'll find we talk about most of these major ideas as we go through this presentation with Russell. So why? Speaking of the presentation, let's hear a little bit about it, Russell.
Yeah, and I also encourage you, if you have questions as we go through, please use the questions tab on the control panel, and we'll pick them up and answer them after presentation. So. Sorry, go ahead, Russell.
And just building on that point about questions, hopefully there's going to be some reasonably interesting, provoking ideas that come out of some of my presentations. So I think there's going to be ample time at the end for questions. So please jot them down as we go along. So getting into the presentation, so Terminal 5, this is a quick outline of what I'm going to go through, give you an idea. So we're going to start off talking about BAA, the client for the Terminal 5 project, which really sets out the context for why we did a lot of the things that we did. Going to talk about the project itself, the key elements, the principal components, talk about the project timeline, which was quite protracted, the problem as BAA saw it and the solution to the problem that we adopted, the contract that enabled the solution that we wanted to fulfill, and then some examples of what was enabled through that T-5 agreement contract, and then a few thoughts on the end of learning, which is very much my personal learning taken away from my sort of 5 years on T-5 and years afterwards on Terminal 2. So John, that's good. Push the button. Okay, so the client. So BAA PLC was formed in 1987 when the British Airports Authority was privatized. So this is quite important. BAA was a privately owned company listed on the London Stock Exchange. But up until 1987, it'd been a public utility running not all of the airports in the UK, but certainly the 3 London airports, or 3 of the 4 London airports, bunch of airports in Scotland. And in 2001, we owned and operated 7 UK airports. We had interests in about 10 others around the world. So we had a couple in America, where I think we were the operator from memory, Pittsburgh and Indianapolis. We had a couple in Australia, again, where we had a financial interest, and I think we operated Perth and Melbourne, and definitely 1 or 2 in Italy. So basically, we had a mission statement to become the world's most successful airport company back in those days. And we'd like to think we were doing pretty well by about 2001. just picking up on that point at the bottom there, hang on a moment, John, because I want people to recognize there that our market capitalization in 2001 was about 4.8 billion pounds. That number's quite important, and I encourage you to remember it as we go forward. So next, John. Okay, probably a bit more about BAA, and talking about BAA before Terminal 5. So even without the Terminal 5 investment, BAA invested about 500 million pounds every year on its asset base, on its existing airports, of which the vast majority was spent at London Heathrow, London Gatwick and London Stansted, probably half of that money at Heathrow and probably a quarter each at Gatwick and Stansted. So immediately before I went to Terminal 5 in 2001, I was running a program at Stansted, which was about 200 million pounds, an extension of the terminal building, brand new satellite, new aircraft stands, all the same sort of things that we were going to do at Terminal 5. And again, we were already using and practicing an awful lot of the techniques that Fernando and John have already introduced, and that we're talking more about a few more slides later on. BAA was absolutely passionate about improving project delivery performance. And it's probably more accurate to say that our chief executive, who was a guy called Sir John Egan, was passionate about improving project delivery performance, because certainly before Sir John arrived in about 1991, we thought we were pretty good at it. We thought we were probably better than any other utility in the UK. We were as good as the best private developers. So it was a bit of a shock when Sir John came along and said, well, actually, you're not very good at it, and I need you to reduce the cost of our projects by a factor of 2, and I need you to reduce the construction schedule or the overall project schedule by a factor of 2, and if you don't, the company's not going to go anywhere. We need to invest far more than we can afford. We need to build far more facilities than we can afford if you guys just carry on doing what you're doing. So we were in denial for a couple of years about that. He's mad, he won't last. We just carry on doing what we're doing. But around about 1995, when he sorted out the rest of the company and we were doing great customer experience and great retail experience and great property development, he finally turned around after beating us up for 3 or 4 years and realized that without his help, we were never going to do it. So he started introducing us to, probably important to say, Sir John came from a background in motor manufacturing. So, you know, he knew all the Toyota stuff. He started introducing us to things like TQM. He introduced us to continuous improvement. He introduced us to lean. And he introduced in particular, you know, the importance of reliability and consistency. So in 95, we developed a pretty comprehensive project process, which was certainly far better than anything that we'd done before. In 96, we started introducing framework agreements. We reduced the size of our supply chain from probably 1,500 suppliers to about 100. So before 1996, we had preferred supplier lists, but to be honest, the hurdle to becoming a preferred supplier was quite low. So it was a very long list. So John made the point that, you know, you can't work with 1,500 people and get better or help them to get better. So you needed to have a much smaller, sharper supply chain. 1998 was a pretty pivotal year. Sir John was asked by the UK government to head up a task force, which ended up producing a report called Rethinking Construction. I think it's still a very good document today. I'm sure it's available on the web if you go digging for it. I'd encourage you to try and find it and have a read. I think it's as relevant today as it was back in the late 90s. And very much, yeah, during 99 and 2000, we were getting into our second generation of thinking, beginning to become more aligned to a manufacturing process, beginning to think about what does an airport project team bring to the party, what does our supply chain bring to the party through being a smaller delivery focused team. And we had a delivery team focused on the airfield, we had a delivery team focused on the shell and core of buildings, we had a delivery team focused on baggage. So we were beginning to adopt some of the very good ideas that Sir John had introduced us to. And I'd encourage you just to read the words at the bottom of the page there, because I think it pretty much sums up where BAA was at the end of, sort of 1999. We are not inviting, so this is straight out of Rethinking Construction. We're not inviting UK construction to look at what it does already and do it better. We are asking the industry and government to join with major clients to do it entirely differently. So this was not a step change, incremental evolution in the way we were thinking about delivering construction and capital investment. This was about, let's do it totally differently, because we just don't like the results we get from conventional thinking. Okay, John. Probably just don't go back, but again, by the late 1990s, we started hanging out with the lean construction guys. So we'd met up with Glenn Ballard and Greg Howell and Todd Sabel, and we were hanging out with Unipart in the UK. Unipart, sort of are known as the leader in motor part logistics and supply chain management and reliable delivery. So we were hanging out with those guys and beginning to work out how you did supply chain management and supplier improvement, and in particular working together in integrated teams. So, we'd been on this journey probably from 1995 to 2000, which was already quite transformational before we got onto Terminal 5. Okay, so then we get onto Terminal 5, and T5 is the biggest project even now that BAA, which pretty much doesn't exist anymore. So it's the biggest project BAA ever did. And the key elements there in the middle of the image on the right, the big rectangle right in the middle of the image, that's T5A, the main terminal building. To the right of that is T5B, the first satellite, T5C, the second satellite on the right-hand edge of the diagram. We built a new Heathrow control tower, which was over in the central terminal area. That was needed because of the height of the new buildings we were building. The old control tower, which was about 37 meters high, could no longer oversee the whole airfield or the extended airfield. So a new control tower, and we've got a few images of that coming up. 60 no aircraft stands and associated taxiways associated with T5A, B, and C. A new dedicated slip road to the M25, which is the road to the left of the image, on the left of the image. And then not visible in the image, but there was extensive tunneling, both board and subsurface, picking up or extending the London Underground Piccadilly line over to T5A, the Network Rail main line Heathrow Express to T5A. There were then various track transit tunnels between T5A, B, and C. There were baggage tunnels between T5A, B, and C. So basically, virtually the whole of that area that you can see between the two main runways was one incredibly large excavation at one point in time. In fact, probably for the first 18 months we were on site, we just had a great big hole in the ground. And I ask you to remember the market capitalization of BAA at 4.8 billion. The importance of that is that the budget for Terminal 5 was about 4.3 billion. So we were basically, if you like, betting the farm on Terminal 5. And we just could not afford Terminal 5 to go wrong, because in the language of John Egan, if it did go wrong, we were going to hold the company below the waterline. And BAA would not survive a bad Terminal 5. So it was, no pressure, all good fun. Next slide, John. Okay, and I think I mentioned at the beginning, it was quite a protracted timeline. So between about 1990 and 1994, we were in a development phase. We submitted a planning application in late 1993. That triggered a public inquiry. Public inquiries take a long time to set up, so the public inquiry didn't start until about the middle of 1995. It was the UK's longest public inquiry ever, at circa 7 years. It finally published its decision in about November 2001. And then I was going to say got into the easy bit, but that would be not true. We then got into delivery in about the middle of 2002, when the site had been cleared and we started digging holes. And we did open the terminal on time, on budget, but as it says there, not without its own challenges. And we certainly had operational issues on day one, but we finished on time, we finished on budget. And we could do a whole nother presentation on the operational challenges on the 27th of March, but probably not for this forum. So, you know, this thing went on for a long time. John. Okay, so not only was it a mega project in its own right, you know, 4.3 billion pounds, it had some very specific challenges. So the actual site of Terminal 5 that I showed you on one of the earlier slides, the actual site just under 1 square mile in physical area, which is, you know, bounded, if you like, by the northern taxiway on the left of the picture there, and its associated parallel taxiways, southern runway on the right-hand side, and its associated parallel taxiways. And then between that and the existing airport central terminal area, which is the congested mess at the very top of the picture, and the M25 at the very bottom of the slide, or that's where it would be if the photograph extended. We were going to invest about £4 billion in that square mile, which is incredibly intense. And everything was stacked on top of one another. I mentioned there was an awful lot of, there were huge basements underneath the terminals, lots of tunnels coming in from the central terminal area. I've already mentioned the whole site was basically a hole for about 18 months. Added onto that, we had a single site entrance to the whole of that site. We'd just been through 9/11, so even airport security requirements had just gone up a couple of notches. We basically, every single person who got onto the site, so every operative, had to get a permanent site pass, had to have criminal records checked. You could be escorted around, I think, for a week or maybe 2 weeks, but if you didn't get passed up properly within that time, there was a limit to how many temporary passes, escorted passes you could call on. And then just to add even further onto that, we had you were not allowed to deliver to that site entrance between 7 and 9 in the morning and 4 and 6 in the afternoon. And just to give a flavour of why that was, I live about 70 miles from Heathrow, and therefore I drove to and from the site fairly regularly. The first 60 miles of my journey I could do in basically an hour, and the last 10 miles took me another hour plus or minus 15 minutes, depending on whether it was a good day or a bad day. So there was a very good reason why we weren't allowed to deliver during those peak hours, because the western side of the M25 is just a car park already and didn't need to be further clogged up with, you know, construction vehicles. And then right down at the bottom of the slide, you know, a few key metrics: 6.5 million meters cubed of earthworks, I've already mentioned. The site was basically a hole for 18 months. 335 cubic meters pavement concrete, another 1.2 million meters cubed of structural concrete. Just a few headline numbers. I could, you know, give you a load more, but that's not really the point of this presentation. So John, so basically we had a big project with some severe logistical challenges. And over and above that, the real problem was we went and quite rightly did some serious research about, you know, mega projects, both in the UK and airport projects around the world. And the result of those studies suggested that if we did what everybody else had always done, we could probably expect an outcome of, you know, final cost of twice the budget, opening date delayed by 2 to 3 years, 4 or 5 deaths during construction, all of which were totally unacceptable to the business. And I sort of quite like Einstein's quote there of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result, which we took very seriously and therefore decided that, you know, if conventional wisdom wasn't going to work, we'd better do something which was unconventional. John, next slide. Okay, so the solution that we adopted was pretty much to ignore conventional wisdom, which wasn't really necessarily quite as radical as it sounds, because as I said earlier, we were already moving away from traditional construction and towards a more manufacturing methodology, even in our wider airport business. So, you know, we weren't doing this from a blue sky moment, a flash of lightning. It was really developed over a 4 or 5 year period. But our thinking was that our new methodology, you know, would be founded on suppliers as valued partners, respect for people, safety, collaborative working, integrated teams, balancing customer value and production value. I'll come back to that in a minute. Concurrent design of product and process, come back to that in a minute. And very importantly, and I think this is something that relatively few organizations have really properly picked up on subsequently, is that we did not point suppliers on the basis of work packages and tendered prices. We picked all of our suppliers, both construction suppliers and consultants, on the basis of their capability and capacity, and then we put them to work alongside our own people in integrated teams. And then the final point, you know, which I'll come back to again in a minute when we talk about the contract, but we were looking to make sure that the outcomes that were achieved or that we needed to achieve drove behavior. And it wasn't the contract and the commercial arrangements with our suppliers that drove behavior. It was the outcomes we needed to achieve as the client that we wanted to have first and foremost in everybody's, in their brains. In other words, they weren't protecting themselves. We were all looking to get the right outcome for the client. So just talking about the little diagrams there on the right for a moment, we reckoned that broadly speaking, the left-hand why, what, how is pretty much a very simple representation of conventional wisdom, conventional practice. The client sort of has a need, which fairly quickly gets translated into what are we going to do, which fairly quickly leads to the appointment of a bunch of architects and a bunch of engineers, which fairly slowly results in the creation of, let's say, a feasibility design, a scheme design, a detailed design, all of which does wonderful jobs, you know, driving up fee for architects and engineers, but I would argue doesn't necessarily move us on to the achievement of what the customer really wants or needs. But eventually, somewhere between what and how, we go out in conventional wisdom and we procure some contractors. We give them 6 weeks to come up with a price. We give them, you know, 6 weeks to work out how they're going to deliver this thing that we've spent 3 years designing. And we expect to get some fantastic outcomes from that 6 weeks of contractor thought. So instead of that, the diagram on the right-hand side is saying, well, instead of that, let's spend as the client a lot more time thinking in the why period, what are the outcomes that we really want? So on Terminal 5, we put a great deal of energy into defining the passenger experience we were trying to achieve, the retail experience we were trying to achieve, how the baggage performance would impact on customer and passenger experience. And the strap line for Terminal 5 when I arrived there was to create the world's most refreshing terminal. And I think that effort really paid off because I think for many years after T5 opened, it fairly consistently won awards for being, passengers' favorite terminal around the world, and therefore, which demonstrated to me that putting that effort into what you really want in terms of outcomes pays off, and in conventional wisdom is rarely done well by clients. Between why and how is where we procured and applied our supply chain to the problem. We spent a lot of time working in how are we going to achieve these outcomes, and in working that how, the final version of what came out of that integrated team working. So very different from the conventional wisdom on the left. And then the diagram on the bottom is really, I suppose, just saying the same thing in a slightly different way. It's saying what we're trying to do here is get the best balance between the customer value, the customer, the outcomes that the client is looking for, and the production value, which is the combined capability and experience and wisdom of our suppliers. Because we knew the suppliers who were going to deliver this thing, it wasn't going to be somebody else. We had what we had, if you like, and it was their capability that we were going to use to deliver this thing. So getting that balance and sliding the fulcrum backwards and forwards until we got something that delivered what we wanted but was deliverable by our supply chain was pretty key in the process. John. Okay, so that's all great, isn't it? It's a brand new way of delivering. It's all very exciting. How on earth do you contractualize that? So we fairly quickly abandoned the thought of modifying an existing construction contract. And from a blank sheet of paper, we wrote this thing called the T5 agreement. And although it was a very thick document, and in part it started life as a delivery team handbook. So it started life setting out how we wanted everybody to work together. So it was predominantly, as I say, it was a handbook of a way of working. And there's very little contractual page. There are very few contractual pages in the document, probably half a dozen somewhere towards the back. But within those half dozen pages, you've got these 6 major principles. BAA pays all properly incurred costs. Suppliers commit to deliver current best practice and to strive for exceptional performance, and that was a contractual requirement. Suppliers commit to work in integrated teams and to collaborate, and that is a contractual requirement. So strictly speaking, if suppliers chose not to, they would have been in breach of their contract commitments. Probably the single most important bullet point on this slide is proactive management of opportunity in to reduce cost, and proactive management of risk out to minimize risk and cost escalation. And we worked every single day and probably every single hour of every single day working on those 2 things. That was my life day in, day out on Terminal 5. Driving in opportunity, driving out risk. Not least because, my employer, BAA, took all the risk. So we were quite keen that if we were taking it, we would manage it. And, purely, we took out a integrated project insurance, which was pretty groundbreaking at the time. Again, probably a hour's worth of presentation in its own right, but we won't do that. So, John, how am I doing for time, by the way? Is this okay? I think I'm all right, actually. Okay, so we had an entirely new delivery methodology driven by, some very strong values. we've set out a set of contractual principles, and that created an environment in which everybody could now focus on delivering the outcomes. Suppliers had no risk here. Consultants and engineers and architects had no risk. Contractors and specialist suppliers had no risk. We were going to pay them pretty much everything they did. Now, there were some exceptions to that, because if you have the principle of all reasonably incurred costs, clearly you can have some not reasonably incurred costs, but they were minimal, to be honest. But having created that environment, we were then able to start really motoring again on some of the ideas that Fernando and John introduced at the beginning of the slides of lean construction and production systems, operational science, really developing, testing and applying innovative solutions, design for off-site manufacture and on-site assembly. And this is quite an important one, again, often overlooked. We involve suppliers in certainly all of the governance around how we're going to do stuff. I mean, clearly the client's going to retain some decision making around, if you like, the final what and the final, and certainly around the why we're doing this, but around how we did anything, suppliers had a voice in that decision making. And probably all four of those bullet points are sort of picked up in the illustration on the right, which is the new Heathrow air traffic control tower, which is my baby project. So this was the one that, broadly speaking, caused me least difficulties. But picking up on the innovative solutions there, the cab section, which is the thing suspended in midair in the picture, that was constructed, that's about 18 meters high, about four-story building, about 900 tons worth of steel in that cab structure. That was constructed to the south of the southern runway on a couple of disused aircraft stands. While that was being built over there, the foundations were built in the final site, for the final site. And at the same time as all that was happening, the mast sections, which is the white triangular thing, just being rolled into position, they were fabricated off-site, fully fitted out off-site, and then delivered to the site, rolled into position underneath the cab. Cab was bolted down, the whole thing's jacked up again, and you end up with the structure in the small image on the right-hand side. So, very integrated team solution, very innovative, lots of wind testing of the design, lots of testing of the method, but all ultimately successfully delivered. Next slide, John. Okay, so picking up on a few of those ideas in particular, so production system design, we put an awful lot of thinking and work into our reinforced concrete rebar design, manufacture and installation. I think I mentioned the 1.2 million meters cubed of reinforced concrete on the job, so it was quite important to get this right. By working together with our designers, with the contractor, we had our own rebar shop based at our Colnbrook Logistics Centre. So we had our own rebar factory. All bar delivered to the site was, or to T-5 was straight bar. We bent it and fabricated on site, effectively at Colnbrook. And while you might think, having gone through a 7-year public inquiry and another 6 months before we got on site, you'd like to think that the design was complete at that point, but there was an awful lot of detailed rebar design not complete even then. So it became critical that we find a way of breaking through the existing paradigm and existing way of working, that was taking us 6 weeks to design, manufacture, rebar, and that was based on traditional thinking of you did some calcs, you did a bit of an outline design, you shared that around, people commented on it, it came back, it got redone, blah, 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 blah. We got down to a 5-day process whereby people sat around a table and sketched out a design. An engineer did some calcs and stamped them off as being checked and approved. That went straight into a 3D model, from where it went into the fab shop, and then another 2 days out onto site and installing. So although people might not believe that, we did actually get that 6 weeks down to 5 days. We used some pretty state-of-the-art technology. Oh, hang on, no, back.
Okay,
Back, John. So I'd say digital prototyping, 3D immersed reality is probably still state-of-the-art today. But we were certainly doing that, 20, 21, 22 odd years ago, and there's some images on the right. As I've already said, we prefab rebar cages at our Conbrook Logistics Centre. So the image in the bottom right-hand corner is an indication of the sort of thing we fabbed up off-site. And we had daily work planning and daily work packs. There was really no laydown site available on site during the first 18 months. I said it was mainly a hole. And pretty much at maximum, we had a day's worth of laydown site around the buildings. So our intent was to deliver today the materials that we would use tomorrow, and got into that very much, that activity of daily planning and pulling to the site the materials that we would use the day after tomorrow, effectively. So bottom bullet point there, it says 3 months recovered on the critical path. Just as we got into our substructures, which from memory was around about September, October 2002, we got into the worst autumn weather that I think the UK had experienced for 50 odd years. And we spent about the first 3 months sliding around in the mud, not doing any work. So at one point, we were certainly 3 months behind the critical path, but that was recovered, and we finished and handed over to the roof team on time around about September of 2003. So a remarkable effort by the substructures team. John. I'm going to speed up because I think I'm taking a bit too much time. So another example, T-5 roof was about 150-meter clear span roof. So it's really more like a bridge than a roof. This was chosen before I arrived. It wouldn't have been my choice, if I'm brutally honest. But it was quite an exciting thing to build. But we were very conscious that we needed to get the roof abutments and the rafters to line up about 25 meters above the ground, and the usual method of hitting one piece of steelwork with a 28-pound hammer wasn't going to work at the scale we were operating at. So the point of the first run study up in Yorkshire, 200 miles from the site, was to work out whether we got our jacking points right and that we could physically manipulate this abutment structure into a precise 3D alignment, both vertically and horizontally, so that we could then jack the roof rafter up to meet the abutment. Moving on. And then finally, demand fulfillment and logistics. I've already mentioned that we had 2 off-site consolidation centers. I've already mentioned that we had a single site access. I've already mentioned that we were constrained on when you could use that site access for the delivery of materials. So we took logistics very, very seriously. No material was allowed to be delivered direct to the site. All material was delivered to a consolidation center, We very much ran a sort of Kanban system on that. So a tractor unit came from the factory, wherever that was, bringing a full trailer onto a consolidation center. That tractor would then pick up an empty trailer, take it back to the factory, and we had our own tractor units we then used to take the full trailers onto the construction site. Obviously, those drivers were passed up, bearing in mind the previous comment about security. Those drivers knew the layout of the site, so they went to the right place. And those drivers knew they had to hit a 5-minute slot at the entry gate, otherwise they'd get turned around, because those were the rules. So really, really, really well thought through and controlled logistics, very much based on daily work package and pulling materials to the site, as I mentioned already. And then we had a marketplace approach for consumables. We didn't have room to have lots of different suppliers having their own storerooms littered around the site. We have one central storeroom operated by the BAA logistics team, and again operating basically a Kanban system where 400 odd consumables were basically consistently restocked on a daily basis, using simple milk run thinking. And as it says there, we had cycle times down to 2 to 3 hours rather than 24 hours. Reduced the inventory because of that from a couple of weeks to 1 day, which kept the size of the storerooms down. 98 supply reliability, 400 different made to stock items. So again, a lot of thought went into logistics, and I've just touched on a few of the ideas there. Fernando, I think you're talking about the next slide, because I'm not.
Yeah, thank you, Russell. Yeah, just so many wonderful things were happening. One, just the movement of materials was fascinating on how that was set up in a production system design. So managing engineered order products by applying lean production philosophies, really, there are 2 great examples that drove efficiency and capacity way up. One is by how they manage concrete, right, and setting up the batch plant delivery protocols, and taking what could have been a very limiting factor to basically doubling the capacity of what a batch plant could do if they worked with the teams and organized and made things ready well in advance, right? So a lot of wasted time that you normally experience was gone. The other thing, the same thing was the reinforcing steel. There was so much rebar, as you could see, with a 1.5 million cubic meters of concrete and all the rebar that goes into that. How do you manage all that and those flows into the site, right? So producing all that, basically through their own system, setting up their own plants in their logistics centers, really helped pull materials. And going to what Russell said earlier, hey, if I need rebar and in 5 days I get it, based on the demand of the week. So a lot of fantastic things on how materials were moving in and out of the job site and made to order and at the demand of production plans that were happening daily and weekly. So similar examples on how precast was delivered and how polystyrene panels were delivered as well. So with that, I'll leave that there, and we'll get on to John's part and Ali's part. So.
Well, let me just quickly run through this.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
A few important things here. So, so I think going down this type of, abandoning conventional wisdom, strong client leadership was clearly essential. And I have to say, even parts of BAA wobbled occasionally when things got a bit tough. But overall, because we tied ourselves into a contract, it was absolutely, even when people wobbled, we went and read the contract and thought, oh my God, what have we done? But we've done it, so we better stick with it. So strong client leadership. Collaboration is not easy. If anyone tells you it's easy, they're pulling your leg, because it's hard, because none of us really know how to do it. And until you've, and I think it's a suck it and see and just get stuck in, but until you've done it, you haven't done it. and picking up on that. I mean, not all of your people will be up for this. Okay, and that's okay, because you put them on your projects where you're not doing this stuff. You know, and not all of your supply chain will be up for this, and that's okay, because you put them on your projects where you're not yet doing this stuff. And eventually, you know, they'll both leave, and that's a good thing as well, because that'll slow down your competitors, because they'll still be doing it the old way. Categorically, this stuff requires the management of production as well as the management of projects and contracts. And I think it's sad to say that, you know, in 2024, I see very few construction managers who do anything other than manage contracts. The art of managing construction and managing production is almost a lost skill. People don't do that anymore, and certainly not integrated construction. I think specialist suppliers manage their own work because they have to, but I don't see construction managers managing, you know, the whole site or the whole value stream. Categorically, you know, this requires new practices and new behaviors, and you'll hear people talk about that all the time, and it's true. But I think even more important, certainly as important as new practices and new behaviors, is that we need new technical thinking, skills, processes, and procedures. Now, maybe that's not quite as true anymore, because we don't need new technical thinking, because, you know, the stuff that John and Fernando are promoting here, and we've talked about at the beginning of the presentation, those are the new skills, the new thinking, the new processes that we need to apply. People have already worked them out. We now need to get better at them and apply them more widely. And I think as the results of T5 show, it is worth the effort. I mean, I'm not going to deny it was hard work. Wrestling T5, I described Terminal 5 as the beast, and we wrestled the beast every day. And the beast occasionally kicked the shit out of us, right? Sometimes you beat the beast, and that was a good day. You know, and a lot of the time it was a sort of unanimous draw. And we agree to come back tomorrow and do it all again. So it's not easy, it's hard. But as it says at the bottom, if you always do what you always did, you're always going to get what you always got. So on that thought, John, over to you.
Wow.
Meanwhile in
Yeah.
Oregon.
Thanks for that wrap up there on T5. Excellent. Okay, John.
Yeah, I'll do this though. We'll probably still plan on trying to end on time, so we'll be a little quicker on this. But so this is what's kind of interesting is I actually got to visit Heathrow Terminal 5 in about 2002, 2003. But over here in Oregon, we were doing a very different type of projects, you know, about as different as you could be from that heavy infrastructure project in London. We were installing building clean rooms and installing, you know, leading edge, first time ever installed in many cases, equipment. And we have one in the 95 range where very similar story Russell told. Hey, we got to do this faster than we've ever done it. And how we want to do it is view our trade contractors and partners, and was very much a shared savings. Help us figure out how to do it cheaper. You can have part of the savings, and they jumped on it. We also did a lot of TQM and a lot of things to create flow and minimize learning curves. And that happened to be the first project up in this region where we embrace the concept of incident injury free planning, or incident injury free environment. And a lot of folks said that was the best project of their career. And all this actually happened to two things. One, that happened, if you notice on the date, this happened before the formation of the Lean Construction Institute. So this was happening as kind of the same time as emerging in the London area. And that is also how my friend Ali got stuck with me, because I was on this project and it had gone very well. So on the next bunch of projects out in Oregon, we were installing a new generation of equipment, and we did a lot of the same things. So Ali, you've been listening to this for some time, and as you heard Russell talk, what did that stick out to you?
Thanks, John. For the record, Russell and I had not met prior to this meeting, so we had not talked. And I was writing some of the things Russell was talking about. Certainly, a lot of stuff resonated with me. For example, the solution with the 8 items that Russell showed, with respecting people's safety, collaborative, contract needs to be aligned with what you're trying to deliver. We called it project culture. And we had all of these listed as part of that. And I cannot emphasize enough that the contract you put in place has to be aligned with the mission. You can't use a design build contract to IPD, integral project delivery contract. So you have to be careful with that. Or some of the things, again, Russell said, no risk, financial risk to any of the contractors. We did the same thing and added the incentive programs that they had so much at risk in their incentive that they wanted to participate. Suppliers in decision making, we called it collective intelligence. And we had the contractors actually came to the table and they said, we don't need 100% design documents because the routing you show, it gets changed by us anyway. So duration of design got shorter and we could deliver faster. Or what's a workable backlog? There was never a crew was going to stand there and say, what am I doing next? There was always stuff that needed to be done. There was also this concept that whatever we're going to do for the project needs to be communicated to everyone. So the project culture was from the base all the way to the leadership was the same thing. So we caught people at the site orientation. So our project at one point, the site had 2,300 people and everybody knew what the project culture was because we taught them at the entrance to the project. And the learnings were, Russell, they were right on. That it's hard. And unless the leadership understand what they're going to be doing and they're all aligned on the mission, whether you're the owner, representative, designer, contractor, supplier, everyone has to be focused on the mission. And at the end of it, you have to trust the people you work together. And I think you brought that up several times. And one of the things John taught me was that if you don't trust somebody, you don't work with them. So everyone is on the team. You have to trust each other. And trust isn't something that, you say, oh, I trust that person because that person puts their tie on every morning. It's competency, reliability, and certainly sincerity. And all of these comes together as a package. You cannot pick one thing and say, this is the one that's going. The servant leadership is going to deliver the project. You have to have everything together. So Russell, certainly I've experienced what you were talking about, and thank you. Thank you for sharing it the way you did.
Great. And on the graphic there, you saw our ideas, and at least on those projects in Oregon, we actually did a lot of those things. We didn't do all of them. And particularly, I think if I was looking back, we would build upon what the folks did for advanced work packaging and workforce planning to have really robust things ready. And I heard a lot of robust make ready work in Russell's conversation. So I think we're at the end of the hour. You can kind of grasp at some golden nuggets. I don't know, we'll take time for questions, but if people have sent them in, we'll try to respond to them. Fernando, I know you have to step fairly soon also.
Yeah. So it's, a couple of questions, a lot around the T-5 agreement. One is it possible to get a copy of the T-5 agreement, at least the main items? I don't know if that's publicly available or not. Russell, you know?
The straight answer is I don't know. I mean, I have a copy, but I'm not sure I can share it around. To be honest, I don't think it's that helpful. I think, if you work from the principles level that's on the slide deck, those are almost the contractual level. Well, they're the contractual principles.
Yeah. There's some information about the core team setup and then the other service setups. There's a lot about that, but you're right.
Your only problem is if you employ a lawyer and tell him that's what you want to do, he'll have a heart attack. So
yeah,
I'm not going to be accountable for that.
Yeah,
That's good.
and, we do a lot of contract language, you know, specifically to address projects. Not everything is going to apply, but
One real quick point on the contracting, what we learned in Oregon, as we went from 1995 to about 2002, the contracts became increasingly transactional, as driven by our by our customer. And one of the more remarkable things is the last project that Ollie and I did together, that last one that turned out extremely well. We actually had a very transactional contract, but through a lot of it, through his leadership and his team's leadership, we were actually able to work around that contract and get everyone working together. So it's not impossible, but boy, it sure be a lot easier to have to do it.
Just to chip in on that, John, it's because most construction contracts are only written in, they only really come into effect when something's gone wrong. So they're all after the event. Yeah. So they don't actually, on the whole, tell you what to do day in, day out. So even if it's a transactional contract, if you've created the environment and the behaviors and the new practices of integrated working, and we're going to collaborate, then at one level, you could argue it doesn't matter what the contract says. I don't think but you have to have had that time period where you build trust, which Ali said earlier. So I think you do need the contract the first time you do this thing. You know, the trust is, you know, we're going to do what we said we're going to do, and I'm not going to turn around as the client in a year's time and actually come back after you because it's all gone horribly wrong. So, you know, I think you can do what you did at Oregon, where you went from, you know, a collaborative contract through a period of time onto transactional. Why you would do that, I don't quite know, but I mean, clearly it didn't get too much in the way. But I don't think you can issue a transactional contract and then say, hey, let's not worry about that, it'll be fine, trust me. You know, that's a lot of trust, basically.
There's one other question kind of related to this is, you know, knowing that you had the contract, you know, what would you have done a little differently, or taking, you know, what was missing that would have improved the outcome, you know, would have made it better for operational readiness or seamless integration, you know, with the operators, especially after, you know, handover or during the process. Anything that you could think of that if it was in this agreement, it would have made the outcome better?
To be honest, I can't think of anything that if it had been in the agreement. That my own personal learning out of Terminal 5 was the agreement that made it all hang together. Ultimately, as I say, this Terminal 5 was a beast, right? And if we hadn't had a contract which tied everyone into this is what we're going to do to tame this beast, then I have no doubt it would have fractured. So I think, you know, overarching the contract and the T-5 agreement was the thing ultimately that everyone worked to, because not everybody did, you know, production system design and operational science. Not everybody did daily work packaging. We had a wide range of suppliers, and not everybody did even some of the things I've talked about. Some of it, you know, as I said, not even all of our suppliers actually really bought into all the things we were trying to do. So, but in terms of, you know, the biggest challenge on T5, which is not exactly the same question, T5 went through this 7-year public inquiry, and we kept believing we were going to get a decision. So we had a couple of false starts. And I think when we finally got the decision, we were in a big trough, right? Morale was low. People have been, I use the analogy of, you know, we'd been circling an airport with a runway closed for a lot of hours, in our case, a lot of years. So the morale on the team was low. The output of the team was low. So the real challenge that I faced, because I walked into the middle of all this, was, you know, we're now going, and we had a BAA leadership team. We said, well, we've got a decision, so when can we start? You know, and any time other than today or tomorrow is not acceptable. So we just went. And on the one hand, that dragged us out of out of the, you know, the low morale, low production, low energy, low everything. But, you know, it was not an ideal place to start from, which goes back to it was hard.
Yeah, well, I think even with what Ali was saying, and you were saying earlier, sometimes you have these agreements, and if you can establish the culture walking through the gate, as Ali said, you know, then there's a lot more flexibility with the team to do essentially the right thing. So I've seen, you know, in both projects we're talking about here and some others, especially, you know, in some UK experience and some of these healthcare experiences, you walk into a job and the culture is just different. People behave differently, want to do things the right way. So I think that's fantastic. So I don't know if anybody else has any comments on that. We'll I know we're a little over time right now.
That's okay. We'll get back to anybody that we did not reach live via email. And we thank you all. Wishing everyone a very safe holiday season and look forward to catching you at the top of the year. What are you laughing about, John?
That my battery just went low at the end.
Perfect
So
timing.
there we go. We will be shutting down anyway.
All right, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank
All
you.
right.
Stay safe.
Thank you so much, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.